welcome back to Active Ingredients, the Life Science Leadership Podcast with me, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International. Today's guest is Deanna Angello. I think she is a true powerhouse in the commercial space with a background that spans some of the biggest names in the industry. Pfizer, Genentech, Janssen, Kite, to name a few. She successfully launched 7 blockbuster drugs, generating over 7 billion in revenue, and then has transitioned seamlessly from large pharma to advising early stage companies. So Deanna currently mentors seed to Series A CEOs, helping them scale their businesses with strategic clarity and a patient-first mindset. In this episode, we explore Deanna's leadership journey from taking on the roles nobody else wanted to building a career defined by authenticity, adaptability, and resilience. So whether you're navigating change, considering a pivot, or reflecting on your own leadership style, this one is packed with loads to learn. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to Active Ingredients, the Life Science Leadership Podcast with me, Tom Dove, founder of CEO of Fraser Dove International. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Deanna Angello. How are you?
I'm doing well, Tom. How are you?
Yes, very good. Thank you. Very good. Right, time for the intros. Here we go. Don't get too embarrassed. So Deanna's experience comes from some of the most well-renowned names in the life sciences, including Pfizer, Genentech, J&J, Janssen, and Kite Pharma, where she held global commercial leadership positions. As a leader, Deanna is known for her ability to drive innovation and inspire teams, always with a patient-first mindset. She's successfully pivoted her career from large pharma to advisory roles, working with SMEs and early-stage healthcare companies. Currently, Deanna mentors seed to Series A CEOs, helping them navigate the complex life science landscape and scale their businesses. Her leadership has been instrumental in the successful launch of 7 blockbusters, contributing to over 7 billion in revenue. So we're going to explore Deanna's unique journey, the challenges, the lessons, and how her leadership approach has shaped her success to date. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Excited to do this.
Perfect. So we are going to speak about some of your experiences, taking on leadership roles that no one else wants, all the way through to your superpowers and the experience with the blockbusters. I think that's going to be really interesting. But we always kick off these podcasts with this question. What do you think are the 3 key ingredients of a successful leader and why?
Oh, great question. First one is authenticity. And to me, being yourself, bringing your whole self to work in what you do in a career, and most importantly, as a leader, helps people feel comfortable. I believe that it increases the trust, but it also, I remember a time where somebody said to me, "You're so refreshing." And I didn't know why they said that. And I was like, why is that? And it's just like, you're just real. And I think in leadership, especially when you're leading groups of people, just at the end of the day, we're all people. We may be in a leadership role, but being real, having people relate to us and us being able to relate to others is really important. I'd say the other thing in leadership that I think is really, really important, especially in today's world, is adaptability. Things change on a dime. I mean, life sciences, in particularly, science at the end of the day rules what's going to be a success and what's not. But I just think, to me, it's linked to just always learning, and nothing ever goes in a straight line. So being able to adapt to the situation, the outcome, the team around you, that's important. And the third ingredient, I would say, is resilience. To me, we all get knocked down in life. It's when we get knocked down, what did we learn? And what's important is getting back up and taking those learnings. So resilience to me, so authenticity, that adaptability as well as resilience are, to me, really 3 key ingredients to effective leadership.
Yeah, love that. And they're all intrinsically linked in a way, because if there are some, challenging times, you need to adapt to them, but also be yourself throughout. I love that. I love the way that those three are linked. Thank you. So let's talk about the early years. Okay, so before we get into the leadership, let's just have a bit of background so our listeners can get a little bit more of an understanding of you, the person, who you really are. Tell me about the younger you, when you grew up, like school, university, etc. Did you think that you would have a career in the life sciences at that point?
Actually, when I was growing up, life sciences, I didn't realize that this was even a career. I will say that I always had an interest in medicine, in the medical field. From my early days in high school, what did they call that? A candy striper, where you're working at a hospital. But I always excelled in sciences, and I just always had an interest in high school. And then when I went to college, funny enough, I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. That's what I applied for. I often use physical therapists for a lot of the sports and sports-related injuries that I get, but clearly I'm not a physical therapist. But I was a psychology major and took a lot of science classes, a lot of neuroscience. I actually thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist when I was in. So then once I got to university, I flipped. I'm like, no, I don't want to be a physical therapist, and thought that I wanted to go the route of psychiatrist, psychologist.
And how do you think that also played into the commercial strengths? Because obviously you've gone on and had a fantastic career in the commercial world of life sciences. Do you think it was trying to understand the way that people think that then took you on that career path?
Oh, absolutely. I tell people all the time, how do people ask me my background? And I also have an MBA, but I always say it's the psychology of people. I mean, you're launching new drugs, innovative products. What do you have to do? You have to understand people, and you have to change behavior. So understanding, and especially in today's world, when I started in this industry, it was about talking to the doctor. Now there's multiple stakeholders and decision makers within healthcare. So ensuring that your product is used, it's not just about going to that doctor. So it's really about understanding people. What are their barriers and hurdles that they have to overcome, including the patient? Tom, one of the things I always say to my teams is I consider this a gift, what we get to do, but I always say put the patient in the center of all of our decision making. It's about the patient journey. Understand what are the hurdles and barriers that they will encounter on the way to getting our drug, and let's work backwards. And then, it's payer, it's this, it's policy. Then it helps really come full circle of what you need to do to change things, but it gets back to that psychology and understanding people and ultimately changing behavior.
Yeah, it's great as well, because I like to ask this question, because for some people it's like, they were clearly focused on life sciences or medicine, or for others it's like, actually, as the university degree started to come to an end, there was a little bit of, what do I do next? Where do I go? And your career, like many, actually started in the consulting space.
Correct. That is
correct. So before we get into the leadership stuff, how do you think that base or foundation layer of consulting has helped your career propel in later life?
Oh, I think it was so foundational. I didn't realize that at the time, but just the way you're taught to think about a problem solution, bring people along, really diagnose the problem, look at the data, both, there's qualitative data, there's quantitative and qualitative, and they both matter. And that is just so foundational to so many things in life. How to tell a story, especially when you have clients. Many people that have worked with me know that I'm sort of a stickler for this. And I learned it in consulting. When you're making a presentation, the headline of each slide. I was taught early on I should be able to read the headline of each slide and know what this is about. It's the key takeaway. So those are skills that I learned in consulting that I bring through, every day in my career. So I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. I would also say with consulting too, you're constantly changing projects. So you have to be flexible. You have to get up to speed quickly on, subject matter experts very quickly. So that's also been very helpful in my career in life sciences.
Yeah, for me, it's always seemed like a really good route to go down, because you get to cover lots of different projects in a short period of time. Often as well, there was lots of travel, there was lots of life stuff being thrown at people in really formative time of their career. But it kind of went out of vogue for a little while, where actually people were kind of hesitant to take consultants because all they thought they were people that would come and do some nice slide decks and not be able to execute. So do you think that, you were able to break that barrier coming into the life sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think one thing, and I always joke with the consultants that I work with, and having lived that life and now being within industry, I'm like, look, at the end of the day, I need more than just a PowerPoint. I have to execute this. So a strategy in a nice PowerPoint is just that. So definitely I think what's great about consulting is you have the opportunity to see many different things across different industries. However, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to leave consulting, and when I was in business school, everybody wanted to go to consulting. And they're like, why are you leaving? And I said, but at the end of the day, as a consultant, you're not accountable. You do the strategy, you walk away. It's up to the client to execute. And the best strategy is the one that's executed. So, I've definitely been able to break through that. Grateful for the skills that I learned, because I think they're so foundational. And I think it's a great career to have just out of college. But for me, I'm all about impact and having, especially in life sciences, impact on the patient. So that means execution.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. And it's fascinating. So thank you very much for giving us all a good understanding of, leaving university, thinking about psychology and how that might, eventually impact your career in the life sciences. But that foundational layer of consulting, as I said, I think it's vital, and it's proven really, really fundamental for you. So let's talk about those first steps into life sciences. How did the role transpire? How did you actually first step into the industry?
So I stepped into the industry as an MBA intern. I was very lucky to be one of the people chosen for Pfizer's MBA internship. And what was fantastic about that was that from that internship pool, they had a post-MBA, a 2-year leadership development program where you did rotational program where you got access to different parts of the industry, but also these programs, as you probably know, Tom, are for high potentials. So right away, I was thrown into presenting, to high-level executives within the industry. And I think that made such a difference to me. I was sold as an MBA intern. I was just like, that was the aha moment for me. I was like, this is the perfect mix of business and impact, but going back to the patient and having a meaningful difference in patients' lives, to me it was both. And that's when that summer is when I realized this is what I really want to do. And I was super fortunate to come back from that summer internship, and lucky for me, for the first week I was back, I got the call that I had an offer to come to their leadership development program.
Yeah, love that. And so let's talk about that leadership development. when did you feel that you were actually a leader for the first time?
That's a great question. I think for me, it was when I started to be responsible for leading cross-functional teams, particularly in the marketing space. As marketers, often we have not direct accountability for a lot of people, but the center of the brand, right? And you gotta inspire and bring a lot of different people along. And realizing that, wow, everybody's sort of looking at me of like what to do. But also, I was not the expert in everything. So it's this moment of, yes, as the marketing, head commercial person on this, I'm accountable for certain things. But it was also for me the appreciation of the expertise that everybody around me had. And what I think is important about that is people often ask me, or through my career as I've interviewed for jobs, people will say, what do you think of cross-functional leadership? And I always chuckle to myself, Tom, because I don't know any other way to lead. I don't know it all, but I believe that the best leaders are the ones that know how to bring the various expertise that we have in life sciences. There's plenty of experts. Sometimes as a commercial person, you're thinking so long and hard about something, and I can remember a time in my career where a regulatory person came up with something and I chuckled. I was like, you're a former FDA person now in industry as a regulatory, and I'm like, watch out, you're turning commercial. But I think that's the beauty of it, like bringing all these different experts. We're all have a common goal. We're driving towards the same thing. And that really lights me up. Like, people often say, how do you know these things? And I'm like, because I've always led cross-functionally, and I always say I know enough to be dangerous about a lot of different functions, but I'm not the expert in all of them. I know who to call when you need to go deep.
Yeah, love that. And it's quite interesting as well because, I mean, for good and bad, sometimes marketing has a reputation in a business. It's either sometimes one of the best stakeholders or sometimes one of the most tricky stakeholders. So to lead cross-functionally from a marketing standpoint must have been a tricky first step into leadership.
Yes, and particularly I would say with your medical colleagues as well. I think what's important, and I say that because I can remember a time one of my colleagues said, I kept talking about the market opportunity or going to market, and the medical colleague says, why do you keep calling it the market? Because it was a physician, they were trained a different way. So it's realizing and having appreciation sometimes, and this was something I learned through my leadership, is what I took for granted in words that I would use wasn't necessarily something that everybody around the table understood. Sometimes I'd be moving so fast that it didn't occur to me that somebody may not understand what I was talking about. So I think the other thing with marketing leading, to your point, is showing appreciation for the expertise that each person brings, and like really having that inclusive leadership, cross-functional leadership team really, in my experience, has helped the teams be successful. It's about bringing everybody to the table. And, again, I'm thinking of a moment in my career, maybe 5-6 years ago, where I was at a different company than my first company, which was Pfizer. And when I was leaving the company, somebody had organized a meeting, and they went around the room and said one thing that they appreciated about me. And this, to this day, really stuck with me. And it was actually, again, a regulatory person, and it was a male. And I say that because he said to me, I've been at this company for, I don't know what it was, 15 plus years. And he goes, never has somebody invited me to the table like you did. And, I'm tearing up a little bit because I that was so meaningful for me. But to be honest, Tom, I was just doing leadership.
What you thought was right.
Yeah, because he had an important perspective. Like I'm a true believer that you succeed as a team or you fail as a team. And there was a pivotal moment in my career early on at Pfizer where I was part of a team, and especially one of my favorite teams in high pressure launch. And I can talk more about that too, but it was just so meaningful to me, and so many people said that you always included me in the strategy. Because to your point about marketing, sometimes, and I've seen this at companies, marketing in isolation will create something. The strategy of like how they're going to market analytics, but at the end of the day, we have such a diverse ecosystem and stakeholders. It really takes all the people working on a brand. So that was just, to me, I was just doing what I believed was the right thing to do, and it just was, I didn't realize that. So I get choked up because I had no idea the impact that I had on him.
Yeah, doing the right thing because it's the right thing to your authentic self as a leader, has made other people feel brilliant. I absolutely love that. So do you think that was like one of the catalysts of your career development, getting that 360 feedback when you're about to leave and go on to your next career step? Do you think that was a good growth moment?
Oh, I think so. I would say also too, there have been organizations that I've worked at where, we used to joke, feedback is a gift. And, I've gotten some tough feedback through the years too. And I think those moments, whether it's formal or informal, how you're showing up, and I think a lot of it goes back to the authenticity. Like, and what do I mean by that? I think of times in my career, I didn't always bring my authentic self to work, and it was sort of what I was taught early on. It was just like, and I wasn't aware of that. And it was a moment when one of my friends, I was out with friends, and they said, oh boy, if you're, I forget which company I was at, but could see you now, what would they think? And I realized that, like, oh my God, there was this business Deanna. And actually in consulting, I had a nickname that they called me AB, and that was all business. And they said, but when I got the happy hour, I was a different person. Again, this is like early in my career. I didn't realize I was doing that, but I also think, Tom, that a lot of that is, particularly for women, I think it's always a fine line. I know I've experienced this in my career of when a woman's being assertive, how they can get labeled. So those are moments in that feedback, both like, again, going back informally and formally, that I'm a work in progress. I'm always growing, and but taking that feedback, and I think most importantly, hearing positive things, but there's just as much goodness in hearing more about what may be your blind spots too. Yeah,
that room to develop. And I think that if one thing that has always struck me in our conversations is your curiosity. I think that, you probably are somebody that goes and asks for feedback, or proactively goes to find the things that they can improve, whilst also, gratitude, tap on the back, for doing some of the good stuff. So let's actually have a look at some of the changes, I think, post Pfizer. So you're working there for over 10 years, living in New York. The next move takes you across the country. So how was that? What happened there? You always are someone, that has said curiosity is a bit of a superpower, but I'm curious now to understand how you've gone from one side of the country to the other and made that change.
So when I was presented with this opportunity, it was for Genentech. It was interesting, and I remember during my interview process. So it was an opportunity to lead them through biosimilar entry. So here's this, huge biotech company, that it's in many ways has made biotech what it is today, is an early pioneer in it. And their three biggest products, Herceptin, Rituxan, and Avastin, were facing biosimilar entry. And I said during the interview process, I'm just curious, why does no one want this job internally? Like, I asked, are you looking more for somebody internally or externally? Because sometimes there is a preference. And I actually, I remember the response of the person who hired me. She said, actually, I have more of a preference for somebody externally. And I didn't know at the time why that was, but I will tell you it was a huge change. And what excited me about it was, here's the biggest biotech that is used to being the first and only. I mean, what they did in oncology, it was just incredible. I mean, this is like, 10 plus years ago now. And that excited me. I had no idea. Biosimilars were new to the United States, but that role was across the organization. So again, that cross-functional leadership, it had high visibility to the CEO and his team. There's a lot of leadership lessons I learned in that role too, I will tell you that. But I think at the end of the day, what that was, I left New York City, Pfizer, known as a commercial powerhouse, and I'm so grateful for all that I learned there. But I went to biotech, which is high science, very different culturally. It was different. West Coast, East Coast in the United States, very different. So there were a lot of moments for me on my leadership journey in that role, going to, yes, it's the United States, but how business is done on East Coast versus West Coast. I had some stumbling blocks along the way, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, and I'm really intrigued as well. You and I have had a conversation before where you said that you became quite well known for taking on the leadership roles that no one else wanted. But you actually used that to progress your career faster. Can you give us some insight into that? And was that move one of those things? If there was no internal talent, is it because no one wanted the job?
Yeah, I truly believe, again, following my curiosity, I was like, oh, wow, I love white space. I love, okay, this hasn't been done before. How are we going to figure this out? And for me, it's about knowing yourself. And do you thrive in ambiguity or do you run from ambiguity? Personally, I think life's all about ambiguity. But I realized that actually, I got energy from that. And I believe in your leadership journey, the more you go up the chain, the more ambiguity you have, right? And being able to maneuver that and figure out, like I always say, I take, complexity and into simplicity. And that's really when you get into something like that's ambiguous, you can't do analysis paralysis forever. You got to go in, diagnose the problem, bring the right people to the table, and start taking action. And that, to me, each time I've done that in my career, and also how I've been able to advance my career because of that. I mean, I remember distinctly the next role I got at the company. I was told one of the reasons they were really impressed with me was the ability of what I was able to do and come in. I had, for such a huge, this was the biggest competitive threat that the company was ever facing. I had limited resources, money and people, but I also figured out, I know how to be scrappy too. Even though I've worked for very large, well-known blue chip companies, I always say, don't believe that, budgets are allocated the same, right? So I had to be resourceful. And that was something that stood out to this particular hiring manager, what I was able to do on such a high visibility, high impact role with limited resources. So I also think that's really important too.
And would you say that that was a challenge, actually getting your head round being in these big blue chips and having to pivot into that resourceful, scrappy nature?
Wow.
Did you see that coming, or was that a bit of a shock?
No, I didn't see it coming. So going back to adaptability, I was like, you have the, $10 billion is a lot of money. And that's what was at risk. And this was, again, go back, this was a company that had always been in a lucky position of having the first and only. When you're the first and only, I don't want to take away from the great work that, people that have had the opportunity to work on those products, but in many ways they sell themselves. When you have competition, which is all I knew it when I was at Pfizer, we had a fight for every market share point that we got. So that was inherent in me. It was a cultural shift too, coming from that type of environment to an environment where people were so used to changing the face of cancer through incredible science, incredible products. But the reality is, I always say, nothing stays the same forever, especially in this industry. Eventually, those are all biologics, so they didn't have the patent cliffs of small molecules and what it takes and what you got to do as the drug progresses through the life cycle. So that was a huge and instrumental change in my career, in my leadership. And I just want to say that, often people are like, oh, I could never do what you do, or I could have never done that. And I think it's the times in our career that if you're not scared, it wasn't that I wasn't scared moving across country, leaving everything that I knew, people, my family, and going into a new company, a new geography, new city. It does take a lot, and it's frankly it's exhausting when you go through it, for anybody who's gone through that. But you power through, and those are the moments in my life I always say I love change, but then when I always put myself in a position of change. But I've done it enough, Tom. I know it's painful in the beginning, but there's sort of a recipe of like how you get through change, and those are the moments that you grow. And it doesn't mean that you're not scared. I mean, it's like, I guess that's the definition of courage. Doesn't mean that you're not scared to do something, but it's jumping, taking that leap, and not letting fear hold you back.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of the experiences that you've had from a blockbuster standpoint, and also, pivoting out of large pharma, large bio. But before we go there, I want to go back into the kind of having to power through, having to grow, sometimes feeling exhausted within a working environment, because sadly, this is a leadership podcast, but most guests have experience of poor leadership more than they have experience of good leadership when they're being led by other people. So can you explain a little bit more about maybe the negative leadership lessons that you've learned from leaders where maybe you wouldn't ever do something like they've done to you and your team before?
Oh yeah, there's one that really stands out in my mind. There's a couple that stand out in my mind. And, I remember a great leader that I had used to always say, seek to understand first. And I think of the moments in my career that were, again, pivotal of like, this is not what I want to be as a leader. And, accusing somebody of something, not fully understanding a situation, not seeking to understand, and fully appreciating that. I don't know, and I really try hard to do this in how I am as a leader, is like, we're all people at the end of the day. And a lot of times people most people are going through something. You know, we have ups and downs in life. And those are moments where I could have really used a good leader. So to me, like that negative leadership really impacted me. But on the flip side, you know, I've also been fortunate of having people who really were authentic and understood Deanna as the whole person and what, you know, as I said, I'm not perfect. You know, life happens, things impact us. It's also about having an awareness of how we may be showing up, but having leaders that don't appreciate that, and it's something I'm very attuned to now in my career. At the time, it was so hurtful and painful of what I went through bad leadership that I vowed to myself, you know, to the best of my ability, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, and if, you know, you were throwing yourself in completely, as you said, in your early career, having the nickname AB or business means that you would probably take some of the poor leadership to heart, you know,
Yes.
and how you then can show resilience, adaptability, you know, and authenticity to be able to bring yourself out of that and then continue to have a great career. Kudos to you. But it is sad that there are more of those negative leadership stories that resonate with people rather than the positive.
Yeah, and to this day, I think you're spot on with what you said. I am definitely, you know, despite having, you know, the nickname All Business, people who know me and have worked with me, I'm an extremely sensitive and empathetic person. And I learned through the years to shake that off. But it does. Bad leadership can have lasting impacts on people's lives. And, you know, that's why I am always a work in progress. I never want to be that. And, you know, it's also, Tom, I'm so dedicated to that. At one point in my career, I actually did a year-long program in leadership development and executive coaching to better understand myself. But more importantly, I bring that into what I do with other people because that's so important to me.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. But you did, taking some positives out of that, you know, one of the best pieces of leadership advice that you've received, as you said, seek to understand.
Yeah.
You know, that for me is absolutely vital. The other thing that I think is, you know, people are joining bosses now and not companies. So actually being your real self when you are trying to entice people to your organization, you know, there should be no skeletons in the closet. This is who I am. This is how I lead. Come and join the team if you want to.
Right.
There needs to be more of that happening, I think, as we seem to be moving away, as I said, to like, oh, there's a company that I want to work for. Actually, I feel a little bit disappointed by the leaders I've met. We need to try and change that narrative. So let's dive into some of the blockbuster information, though, because I'm sure that there will be some listeners fascinated about that. Can you share your viewpoint and leadership lessons, I suppose, across the journey of launching those, or being parts of those launches of those blockbusters?
Yes. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the industry has changed a lot. And often what I see as people, particularly leaders, go through the industry, there's a playbook. A lot of people think there's a playbook of how to launch blockbuster drugs. But when you have the speed of crazy innovative science that we have today, convergence with technology, potentially changing the standard of care, that playbook, or like, this is the way we do things, you know, that's not the same from disease to disease, from science to science, you know, science. So what I've learned along the way is really, you know, you could be working in cancer or, you know, Alzheimer's or pain. It's really, what is the situation today? And really understanding, it goes back to what I said earlier about understanding that patient journey. Are you changing standard of care? If you are, there's more than traditional launch planning that you have to do. There's a lot of market development, because what you don't want to do, and I was in a position where I was working on something, phase 3, and it had the potential to change standard of care. And I remember having a conversation with the CEO, and it was just like, we got to do market development. And a lot of times in this industry, it's it's high risk, high reward. It's that they don't necessarily want to put the money into commercial activities in case there's a failure. But I'm like, we do this because we want to impact patients. If we wait until the approval of the drug to do the market development, all those hurdles and barriers that patients are going to face, they're not going to be able to get the benefit of this amazing science and drug that that we're bringing to market. So that to me is a key thing in launching blockbusters. I've seen what happens when you do that market development, and I've seen what happens when you don't do it. So I'll go back to that playbook. It's in a lot of times right now, it's about creating that playbook. There's so much exciting science out there that's bringing things to market that we haven't seen before, and each market, each disease state's different competition, but it's really stepping into the moment of what's going to work for this market, what are we doing, and ultimately what do we have to do to make sure that when this drug does launch, that the patient can get it. I mean, when you're sick or you're fighting a chronic disease, the last thing you want to do is have to jump through hurdles to get an approved drug. So it's understanding all of that.
Understanding it, and I think going back to adaptability, it's adapting to the market or what is happening real time.
Correct.
A playbook of 5 years previous is potentially 5 years out of date compared to what is happening now.
Correct. The one thing I would also add to that, it's not to say that there aren't some things that work, and there's certain things that you always have to do in a launch, and in launching, hopefully what's going to be a blockbuster. Most importantly, I always go back to the patient. The more I always say, focus on the patient, and the money follows. I don't know that people. I mean, as a business, yes, we have to do forecasts and such, but I always look at it as the more patients we help and the more patients we put into the funnel to do some marketing speak, that the money follows. But most importantly, you're helping more patients, and that's why that's my guiding light. That's why I do what I do. Is how many lives can I impact by doing, bringing this drug or product to market? And that's what keeps me going, and that's what keeps me in this industry. People always say, why do you stay in it? It must be hard, with the drug failures, and things don't always go right. I just can't think of a better industry, again, that allows me to have the business side of it, but that impacts people's lives, and that's tremendously rewarding when you know that you've worked and you've been part of a team that is changing lives.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. One of the most purposeful aspects of any potential career path is in the life sciences. And then you've moved into some slightly different size organizations and been able to pivot. Some people actually are struggling to move from large pharma either into SME or advisory type positions. I definitely want to talk to you about that pivot. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if it's a good idea now to talk about that moment of clarity you had whilst walking at the Dolomites, and whether that was the impactful moment that then has taken your career to its next evolution.
Yes. So anybody that knows me knows I love mountains and open space, and I was hiking in the Dolomites, and it was I had lost my father to a very horrible and just awful neurodegenerative disease. And I think when you have those moments in life, such as the death of a parent, loved one, and I was just running high speed after that happened. And it wasn't until I scheduled this trip in the Dolomites. I don't know what it is with mountain air and just the space to breathe. And it was, I was in a great job, and I was just like, I distinctly remember the moment. I was like, what am I doing? And the thing is I wasn't happy. And people would look at me and they would think, oh, wow, she has an amazing job. But I think what, for me, that pivotal moment was appreciating who I was, what I wanted to do. And sometimes that means stepping off of, I think so often, and I have to sidebar for a second. I remember a point earlier in my career where somebody said to me, doing a professional development conversation, Deanna, whose job do you want? Now this is, back when I wouldn't speak up, and I'm thinking it to myself, I actually don't want anybody's job, because I looked at the people who, do you want this person's job, that person's job? And I didn't know how pivotal that was until, years later in the Dolomites. And what came to me is, it's about having the courage to strike out and follow your path. We're not all the same. Somebody who wants to, let's say also, I haven't always been a marketer. And I think that's actually one of my strengths, is like I bring a full commercial view. What's most important is knowing your path, what lights you up, what's your purpose. And for me, when I looked at the red thread of my career and how I was always taking those roles that, maybe they hadn't been done before, it was new and I had to figure it out. It was just like, this is where I'm going to step off this ladder that I've been on and be more true to myself and what really I wanted to do in my career. And was it scary? Yeah, it was scary, but it was also liberating. And I think when you have those moments of clarity, it doesn't mean that you're not scared, because I get that question all the time. It's about doing it anyways. And I didn't always know what was going to come next, but I knew I always had this desire to be, I'm a builder, I'm thinking of a colleague that always used to say that, you're a builder, Deanna. And to be part of something from the ground up and doing earlier stage, that was just something I was always curious about. So, I came down off that mountain, maybe with a couple Aperol spritzes and a Hugo, which is my favorite. And when I came back to the United States, it was just like, it was just so crystal clear to me. And that was a real turning point in my career. And the things that followed, and even what leads me to today, if I didn't have that moment and I didn't have the courage to step off, whether it's the treadmill or, whatever, it wouldn't have allowed the room to explore all the things that I have, the things I've learned with entrepreneurs, early stage founders, CEOs. I work across people in different healthcare, not just therapeutics. I did a fellowship in venture capital. All these things too leads me to where I am today. But if I had kept going, I wouldn't have had those experiences, the time or the space to, all the things that I've gained and, which brings me to today.
Yeah, and it seems as though it was a pivotal moment to maybe unpack your career, repack it in a different way, with being the same person, with the same skills, with the same experience, but able to change path.
Yeah.
So out of that corporate world, can you explain, where your career has gone to next? Can you give us a bit of an idea? Because I know that you've got old colleagues saying, what is Deanna doing? I wish I was doing all of that kind of cool stuff.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is taking a pause. To your point, like, how do you unpack all of when you're trained for so long, right? In, would I want this job or that job within this certain space? You don't necessarily look back and say, what is all the amazing skills and the transferable skills that I have that can be beneficial to what I want to do? So I think, first having that pause, because I think a lot of times people can get spun up in the conversations I have today, is they know they want to do something different, but they're not sure, and then you just get caught in this hamster wheel and you don't step off. So it's allow yourself that pause, which is what I did. Secondly, it's really knowing the value, your unique value proposition. What do you bring that nobody else brings? And really crystallizing that and knowing that. Then knowing where you want to go. What are the gaps? How do I start to get involved? So for me, I knew that I wanted to get more in the entrepreneurial space. I have been involved with many different accelerators, entrepreneurs. They're always grateful to me for learning. I bring such a commercial lens, and commercial starts way earlier than when you have an approved product. But I learned from them, what it means to be a founder, to have to build. And I think that is another important ingredient to making the pivot. And, the last one I'll say is, like, what I've learned through the years is trusting your gut. What feels right to you and what feels wrong to you. And I think in my life, every time I look back and something didn't feel right and I kept going, it was two things. I mean, the most important thing, anytime your gut tells you no, it's typically out of alignment with your values. It's like really knowing your values is really important. And I think those things have allowed me to pivot. And again, like I said, I have been so fortunate not only working with early stage founders, I've gotten involved with universities with their early stage or their science and in technology and how you can pivot that out into companies. I've been involved in so many investment related things and investment opportunities. I also became an investor as well. But a lot of that built off of the things that I have had the time and space to do. So it didn't happen overnight, but it happened.
Yeah, it did. And so I love it because it's like it didn't happen overnight, but you took that time to pause, knowing your value, what do you bring, know where you want to go, trust your gut, and then the other final piece that you and I have spoken about before is surrounding yourself with inspiring people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is so critical, Tom. I mean, I'm so inspired by so many people that I'm surrounded by now. And not to say that I wasn't before, but I think, again, it's aligning all those things that you just said, like-minded people, and people that inspire you to be more, do more. And, we're taking leaps. I mean, so much of life to me is about taking leaps and not letting fear hold you back. And that's what to me, when I look at the people that I have surrounded myself, they've pushed me to grow. I appreciate that. It's like that growth mindset. And I'll tell you what really lights me up is when I used to get the question of, like, what do you want to do in 5 years? We all get that. And I could never say, like, oh, I want to be, senior director of whatever. I'm like, I don't know, because the world's fast moving. I know that I want to be surrounded by smart people that want to do good, that want to, like, roll their sleeves up and do something amazing. And that's where I feel I'm in this space now of, like, smart, talented, inspiring people. You don't necessarily know the answer, but you have the drive and determination to want to do something incredible in healthcare. And that's to me, like that is so important.
Yeah, for all those leaders that are in, large pharma or mid-sized pharma and are looking to pivot into that like portfolio career or the advisory space, I think this is absolutely perfect advice. But it is that pausing, but then it is throwing yourself into the new world.
Yes.
Even if you're running out of steam in the old one, you've got to take that pause, re-energize, package yourself up in the right way, get back out there.
Yes. Oh, one other thing that I think is really critical is, and it's about surrounding yourself with the people, it's also building a new network. So when you've been in corporate America, big companies, you're surrounded by incredible people. There's so many, I've learned, I feel so privileged to have learned from the best of the best at the companies I've had the opportunity to work at. However, to be able to successfully make that pivot, the advice I always tell people, start getting out there. Look at your local ecosystem. There's so many ways that you can learn and get involved, but it's a completely different network. When you go more the entrepreneurial route, early stage, those are different people. And it's important to build that. And it's like, well, how do I even, do that? Well, again, Rome wasn't built in a day, and networks too. That's one thing people always say to me, oh, Deanna, you're so well networked. I don't look at it as networking to me. I enjoy meeting new people. I nourish those relationships through the years. So to me, I get energized by that. So I don't look at it as like, oh, I got to go to this event and I got to meet, 3 people. And then you also, you can see that when some people, you almost become robotic. Just be yourself. Just go. What do you do? What are you building? And you learn. And then that to me has been also a key piece to get me to where I am today.
Yeah, love that. Because you can get, if you've been in the industry for a while and you know a lot of the same people, it can become uninspiring. If you are on that journey though of wanting to be inspired, you've got to go and find it. As you say, you've got to go and put yourself out there. So kudos to you. I think a lot of people are going to learn some really good stuff from today's episode. It's been absolutely brilliant. So let's dig into the future of leadership, because you've got such a good viewpoint now on large pharma, on patent cliffs, on new SME farmers, biotechs coming through. Also now you've been working with some fantastic founders, so you've got a really good viewpoint on the industry. So what do you think the future holds, and what are you most excited about in life sciences?
So what I'm most excited about in life sciences, I'll start with that, is the speed at which science has been progressing, and the convergence with technology. Those two things I truly believe we're at the golden age of medicine. So that to me is super exciting. A lot of opportunities to bring forth incredible breakthroughs for patients. So I also think that's what's I'm super excited about. But I also think too the future of leadership, if I may add that too. I don't know if it's more post-pandemic or what it is, but I think today's leadership is really a balance of your mind, your body, and your spirit. And really that's something I've learned, and I'm very much more intentional about, of to be able to inspire people to take things to a new level. You yourself cannot be drained. So know yourself, take care of whatever practice that is for you. I get recharged by being in nature. But I think leaders that show up with that mind, body, and spirit, and most importantly, take care of it, those are going to be the types of leaders that excel in not only in life sciences, but I think in the future.
Yeah, I love that line about, if you're drained, you can't, inspire the teams. I'm a big believer in 80% is good enough. If you're 80% balanced across 4 or 5 different things in your life, being it leadership or work or health or mind, 80% is good. It's better to have a few of those at 80% than one at 100 and the rest absolutely drained, because that's going straight into burnout. Okay, and what about if you were to go back and talk to your younger self in that first leadership role, or that first moment you're a director and it's, getting more politically charged or becoming a little bit more challenging. If you could go back to that younger self, what would you tell them?
Oh, that's easy. But I wish I had known this. But the beauty of the question is that I don't have to do it all. For me, when I think back in my career, the hardest jump for me was an individual contributor to, a leader of people. And why was that? Unfortunately, the company I was at didn't necessarily prepare you for that. So like all those things, if you're used to being like a rock star as an individual contributor, the game changes when you become a leader of people. So what you got rewarded on as an IC isn't the same as a leader of people. So for me, I didn't fully appreciate that I didn't have to do it all. So it was, learning through trial and error of like, oh wait, there's people here to do it, and just appreciating that is what I would definitely tell my younger self.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I have really enjoyed the discussion, the varied career that you've had, and the way that you've put all of that, as I said earlier, that career puzzle together to create this new role, and the new way in which you're working is absolutely fantastic. There's going to be so many people as well that are in a similar position and maybe looking at what they do next. And I think that you've given some absolutely amazing advice that I've learned a hell of a lot from. And I'd imagine that a lot of people in industry will. So Deanna, thank you ever so much for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you. One thing I would leave you with, and anybody listening to this, is always bet on yourself. So believe in yourself and bet on yourself, and you'll never go wrong.
Thank you. Love that. Brilliant.
Wow, such a good conversation. It felt a bit like a masterclass in leadership from Deanna there. From embracing ambiguity, empowering through change, she's really been able to redefine success on her own terms. Deanna showed us how leaning into your strengths and staying true to your values can also unlock a whole new chapter in your career. And what about that line, always bet on yourself? Love that. Especially when times are good or tough. I know I'll be taking this to heart. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow Active Ingredients and maybe share it with someone who's looking to grow as a leader and learn from some of the best and brightest minds in life sciences. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.